So it is noontime. I want to thank you all for joining us. This is our webinar for busy lawyers. My name is Laura. I'm one of the law practice advisors with Mass LOMAP. Mass LOMAP is part of Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. These webinars for busy lawyers are designed to bring you practical information in short periods of time. We know that you are very busy. Today's presentation is excellent. It is about the improvements of sleep. I have the great pleasure of introducing my colleague, Dr. Sean Healy, who's in fact one of our clinicians on Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. Sean is terrific in so many ways. To give you a little sense of his background, he has a doctorate in clinical psychology. He has co-authored a book with one of our other clinicians, Dr. Jeff Fortling, that was for the ABA called The Full Weight of the Law, How Legal Professionals Can Recognize and Rebound from Depression, which is something we know a lot of lawyers often struggle with. He has done dissertation and research in the field of conflict resolution. He has facilitated many conflict resolution workshops, discussion groups, mediation, and private conflict coaching sessions. He has in fact done this for a number of different firms as well. Sean does terrific work for LCL, working with lawyers, law students, judges. He also runs two of our many support groups, which are the ADHD group and, oh goodness, I'm sorry, Sean, I'm blanking on your second group.
The job search group.
The job search group, thank you, yes. So he also is involved in free and confidential consultations, as is everyone on the LCL staff and on the LOMAP side where we do the law office management assistance programs. If you have any interest in these, I recommend you check out our websites, lclma.org and masslomap.org. Before I turn it over to Sean, I just wanted to let you all know we will have time for questions at the end. So if you want to submit your questions into the chat, we can continue with them when he's finished. And again, thank you so much for being here, Sean. We are delighted to hear more about the secret sauce of sleep and the importance of it to lawyers.
Thanks, Laura. Let me share my screen to share my slides with everyone. So thank you very much for the invitation to talk today about improving sleep. As I tell others, sleep is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I can talk about it for days on end, but because this is webinars for busy lawyers, I'm going to keep it brief. I won't be able to talk about all the tips and suggestions or insights that I would want to talk about, but I'll try to focus on some good takeaways so that you leave here feeling like you have some tips and suggestions for how to improve your sleep and why that's important, in case you needed some convincing as to why it's important. So just to convince you if you need it, sleep is extremely important. Obviously, we sleep and need sleep on a regular basis in order to function. So when we were little, we slept a lot. Our sleep needs change over time. So for those of you who have small children like I do, you know that babies and small children sleep for chunks of time throughout the day. And adults, we prefer to sleep in larger chunks uninterrupted. We function better that way. So in addition to looking at cute babies, I just want to, again, remind you the importance of sleep. And one of the questions I often get is, how much sleep do I really need? Do I really need 8 hours of sleep? Is that just a pie in the sky goal? So according to the Sleep Foundation, this chart sort of outlines the changes in terms of the hours of sleep that we need as we age. So we need more as babies, we need less as adults, but adults need between 7 to 9, 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And it's helpful to think of this as 7 to 8 hours of sleep that is quality sleep, not just the number of hours. So it's not just how many hours am I laying in bed, but how many hours am I actually asleep, going through the sleep cycle repeatedly, and waking up feeling rested, feeling refreshed. And if you're getting 8 or 9 hours of sleep, but you're waking up not feeling refreshed and rested, there might be other issues impeding the quality of your sleep. So first and foremost, it's helpful to set a goal to get that many hours of sleep, right? And then, in addition to just the goal of those hours, to improve the quality of your sleep. So again, in case you need convincing, while we sleep, our brains and our bodies are doing some very important work. While we're awake and active and focused on what we have to do, our sympathetic nervous system charges our bodies up, right? It helps us stay alert. It helps us focus on problems. It helps us stay attentive. It helps us do the work that we need to do. That activates our fight, flight, or freeze syndrome, right? It gets us activated. While we're activated, this is the experience of stress. While we're activated, our parasympathetic nervous system is sort of sleeping, right? So the parasympathetic nervous system is involved in our digestion, our immune system, helps our sleep. So if we are sort of constantly going, if we feel like we're always on, we're never relaxed, we're having trouble sleeping, what you'll often see are problems with digestion, getting sick because our immune system isn't able to repair our bodies as effectively, and our sleep is disrupted. So this is a time for repair and regrowth and recharge. Oftentimes I get questions like, back in the day or years ago, I used to function on 4 hours of sleep and I was fine. I don't think I need that much sleep. And my response to statements like that is usually, just because you had a period of your life where you were able to get by with unhealthy practices doesn't mean that that's what you should continue. So in college, I drank a lot of Coca-Cola. I could drink Coca-Cola and then go right to sleep. That is not recommended. If I did that today, I would have a very different reaction. But just because we were able to function under optimal conditions doesn't mean that that's what we should continue to do. So when we get poor sleep, here are some things that often happen. So if you recognize some of these experiences as being true for you, pay attention. So your mood is often unstable when you're getting poor sleep, right? Your mood stability. So if you're overly tired, if you're sleep deprived, our emotions are more reactive. So we might not feel as stable or as sort of predictable as we usually are. Also, our memory we have memory issues. We sort of cement our memories from the day during that sleep cycle, right? So the more REM sleep that we get, the more integrated our memories are. So when we're not getting that quality sleep, it's harder for us to remember things that we did the previous day or so. Difficulty concentrating and problem solving, focusing our attention. When we're tired, it's hard to stay focused on something. Our ability to shift from one thing to another is delayed. You might notice this if you're driving while tired, like your reaction times are slower, like your ability to move your eyes and focus on things and shift is slower. It's the same for when we're focusing on our work as well. It's harder to juggle multiple things, to shift our attention from one to another. It also impacts our physical coordination. So I was speaking with Laura prior to starting about how I have a small infant at home right now. So my sleep is disrupted. And every time I have a small infant in the household, I get to sort of take note of how poor sleep impacts my functioning. And one of the things I notice is physical coordination, where I bump into things that I didn't used to bump into. I smack my coffee mug into the counter instead of putting it gently on top. And so it always is an indicator of me like, oh, I need more sleep, because I usually am not this clumsy. In addition to that, your cognitive functioning, your word finding ability, that's something that I experience all the time when I'm sleep deprived, is trying to find that word, not being able to bring it quickly to mind, and sort of taking more pauses. Our executive functioning is all about our coordination of tasks and planning. So that is affected. And also we just make more mistakes when we're tired. Okay. So sometimes we think, I can be more productive if I give up some sleep and work longer. The reality is that we just increase our mistakes. Our quality of our work goes down when we're tired. And so it's often counterproductive, but the more that we invest in our sleep, the better our work is. So the more time we spend sleeping and the less time we spend working, it actually works out to our benefit. So the way that we improve our sleep is called sleep hygiene. This is just a fancy way of describing a routine, a healthy, consistent practice or a routine associated with our sleep. And what this does is it helps us to create an association between our behaviors or our routine and sleep. So our brains start to prepare for sleep before we get into bed. All right, so things like having a consistent bedtime, doing the same behavioral routine prior to bedtime. So if I take a shower, if I put my PJs on, if I brush my teeth, if I wash my face in the same order at the same time every night, then what I'm doing is I'm teaching my brain, once I start brushing my teeth or taking a shower, that's a trigger to indicate that sleep is coming soon. So my brain starts to prepare for it. Whereas if I work and I'm active right up until bedtime, my brain doesn't have that forewarning, that foreshadowing that sleep is going to come soon, and therefore has to make a quicker transition, or it takes time for my brain to transition. So there are many reasons why we have poor sleep or experience it. So these barriers are going to be different for each person. So it's important to know what gets in the way of good sleep for you in order for you to do something about that and improve your sleep. For many, it's anxiety, so anxious thoughts, right? You're busy during the day, you're sort of staying active with your thoughts, and your brain's activated, you're busy, you're keeping your anxious thoughts at bay. And then you lay down and try to shut those thoughts off, that activity off, and then in floods the anxious thoughts. So this can be very common for just stressed out individuals. You got a lot on your mind, you got a lot going on. You're just anxious about things that you can or can't control. And in that time when you're trying to go to sleep is the time when those flood in. Another one is poor boundaries. Right? Whenever we lack boundaries, either with ourselves or with other people, we're basically saying our ability to take control and decide what we're going to do with our time, we're sort of giving up. So setting boundaries with yourself, saying, I'm going to say no, I'm going to stop here, whether that's with work. You can also experience this with sort of your recreation time. Like, I've been busy during the day. Now I want some me time at night. I want to watch a show. I don't want to go to bed yet. I want to have some enjoyable time now. Sometimes you need to set a boundary with yourself saying, it's 10 o'clock, I need to go to bed now. Even though I want to do more, I want to relax more, enjoy TV more, I'm going to put a boundary on myself. Or boundaries with work. I need to, even though I could do more, I could work longer, I'm going to say no, I'm going to stop at this time to give myself the opportunity to do something else. Another common thing I see with busy professionals, particularly lawyers, is the scarcity mindset. So whenever we feel that we are lacking in an area that's really important to us, our attention is focused on that area. So when we feel like our time is lacking or we have scarcity of time, we are focused on how much time we have, how much time we need. And what we often do is we try really hard to increase our time. And so the most common way that we try to increase our time is that we trade sleep for time. I've got 6 things to do before tomorrow. Well, if I shave off some hours of sleep, I can, catch up. I can get on top of my to-do list. I can catch up on my work. I can get ahead, and then I'll feel better Therefore, I'll be more relaxed and I'll be able to sleep better for those remaining 4 hours since I gave up half of them to do work. It's actually the opposite. So I'll get into that in a bit. Disorganization can also be a barrier to sleep. So if we just feel disorganized, if we feel like there's sort of chaos in our environment and we don't have a clear sense of what I need to do next, how things are organized, that will keep our minds activated and get in the way of our sleep. Health issues are also very common, a common barrier to sleep. So if you have sleep apnea, if you have a sleep disorder, if you have other common medical issues that get in the way of your sleep, those are really important to address with your primary care doctor or a medical professional so that you can get specific techniques to help with those issues. Your diet is also a contributing factor in your sleep. So it's also very common for busy professionals to feel like I don't have time to plan what I'm going to eat. I'm just going to grab something, stuff it in me as fuel to keep working and keep going. I don't have time to sort of plan ahead. And usually when that's the case, we don't make the best healthy, food decisions. We grab what's convenient. So we're often replacing quality sleep with caffeine, with sugar, with things that just give us a boost to help us stay focused. And so that's counterproductive. That can get in the way of your sleep as well. Whenever you're trading rest or you're trying to replace caffeine for rest, that should be an indicator that something's not right. There's also some practical things that you should take a look at, which are uncomfortable sleeping conditions, right? If your pillow isn't comfortable, if your mattress is uncomfortable, if the temperature in your room isn't ideal. So sometimes it's small changes like the comfort of your mattress, the position of your sleeping, your position, how light or dark your room is, how quiet your room is. To the extent that you have the ability, try to control those things. Try to see how making changes to that physical environment can increase the quality of your sleep. For some, we can't necessarily control the sound if there's external noise outside, but you might be able to desensitize yourself to it by using something like a white noise machine, where there's some ambient noise that sort of drowns out other noise. And then life changes due to the pandemic have made it harder for a lot of people to sleep. So things like my room or my home used to be my sanctuary, right? It's my time where I can get away from my work. Now it's the place where I do my work. So there's not a clear separation for what I'm going to do in this space. So if you are working out of your bedroom, then your office space is the same as your sleeping space. So making changes to that the best that you can, to the extent that you can be helpful to separate your workspace from your home space. So some techniques or some tips that might be helpful. In terms of sleep hygiene, scheduling your sleep, scheduling a bedtime, scheduling it so that you give yourself the opportunity to get 7 to 8 to 9 hours of sleep, right? And scheduling it as if it's the most important meeting of your day. Most of us just don't value our sleep in the same way that we would value a court date or a meeting with our boss or a meeting with a prospective client, right? Sometimes we value those things like, oh, I would never double book that. I would never back out of that. Schedule your sleep as if it's that important. So having a consistent bedtime and a consistent waking time. Again, set that behavioral routine before bedtime. I'm doing the same thing in the same order prior to getting into bed. Again, if you have anxious thoughts that sort of flood into your mind as soon as you're trying to relax, and that's your pattern, you know it's going to happen, it happens almost every night, then exercise some control in when that's going to happen. Oftentimes we feel like I can't control if it happens, but you might be able to control when it happens. So schedule time before that relaxing routine of, shower, PJs, whatever. Schedule time to worry. Right? Block off a little bit of time. Give yourself permission to worry, to get that stuff out of your head. Right? You know it's in there, so set aside time, let it come out. sometimes writing it down or journaling can be helpful just to get those thoughts out of your head. And you can separate those things that might fit on a to-do list. Like, I want to remember these things. Write them down so that your brain doesn't have to keep them active in your memory. If they're down, because they're written down somewhere, sometimes you can tell yourself, I can let it go now. I don't need to rehearse it. Then there's other anxious thoughts that you can't do anything about, right? So you don't necessarily want to hold on to them. So getting them out of your head is a helpful way of expressing them. And sometimes you might just want to throw that list away or those thoughts away, right? Sometimes it's cathartic, just like crumple up a list of thoughts and throw it away or burn it. But just to get it out of your head can be helpful so that when you do start to relax, you're not sort of plagued with that flood. Also, making a strong association between your bed and sleeping can be an additional benefit. Again, to the extent that it's possible, try to reserve your bed for sleep. Right? So again, if you're working in your bedroom, if that's your workspace as well, try not to be on your bed while you're working. If you can sit somewhere else, just have some physical separation. Try not to read, check email, watch movies on your bed, right? Particularly if it's stimulating activities, right? So if it's involving waking your brain up, try to separate that from your bed itself so that your brain has a strong association that once I get into bed, my brain knows what I'm attempting to do, which is to relax and fall asleep. Other things that you have control over is just look around your environment and try to reduce stimulation, right? Both prior to bedtime. So as part of that routine that you're trying to implement, try to reduce stimulation. So turn lights down, right? If you've got noise in your home, try to turn the noise down, shut the TV off, or shut the screens off. Give yourself a break from that light from the screens, or at least use filters, blue light filters or night settings to reduce that stimulation. I mentioned your diet already. Pay attention to your diet. Just because you were never affected by caffeine, so my college self could drink Coca-Cola right before bedtime. My current self cannot do that. That would be very bad for me. So pay attention to what you're drinking and eating and how that's affecting you in terms of your alertness or your ability to fall asleep. Other simple things can be turn your clocks away from view. Right? Most of us use our devices as our clocks, our workspace, our alarms. So try to put them out of reach. If you have digital clocks, turn them around so you can't see them. What this will do is if you wake up before you want to wake up, you will be able to reduce that temptation to look at the time. Because when we do that, we activate our brains because we typically do math afterwards. Oh, it's 2 a.m. I can get 4 hours of sleep if I go to bed right now. Now I'm more awake. And now I'm anxious because I'm not falling asleep. So the more that we stimulate our brains in those moments, the worse it is for our sleep. So turn clocks away. If you wake up before you want to wake up, just tell yourself, I don't need to know what time it is. I'm waking up too early. I'll just try to go back to sleep. That's fine. Other things like if you find yourself just lying awake in bed, particularly when you're first trying to go to sleep, if you're just awake, try not to stay in bed too long wide awake, right? This goes back to that association between your bed and sleeping. So sometimes it can be helpful to get up, to do something relaxing. So don't turn on screens. Don't activate your brain with something interesting. Try to do something relaxing, like a meditation. Sometimes some stretching can be helpful, right? Moving to a comfortable chair and just relaxing, and then coming back to sleep. You might try reading something boring. Sometimes that helps sort of get your mind to a state of sleeping. I mentioned evaluating your sleeping environment, what your bed feels like, what the temperature is, things like that. For those of you who have small children who wake you up, I love to give a contradictory tip, which is I've just spent all this time telling you how important sleep is and how much you need it. When you are unable to fall asleep, it's helpful sometimes to tell yourself, I don't need to fall asleep. I actually don't need sleep. It'd be nice to fall asleep. I would like to, but I don't need to. Sometimes when we think that we need to fall asleep, like I need to sleep right now, I've got an important day. If I don't get good sleep right now, I'm going to be a wreck tomorrow. Just that process gets us anxious, it gets us activated and wakes us up. By contrast, if we tell ourselves, I don't need to fall asleep, I'll be fine tomorrow. I'll be tired if I don't fall asleep, but I've been tired before and I've made it through that day before. I can do it again. It'd just be nice to fall asleep. Sometimes just taking the pressure off a little bit actually helps us relax, to reduce that pressure, that anxiety, and get back to sleep. I went very quickly over like all these changes, or some of the changes that we're experiencing right now with the pandemic. That, as well as the stressors that we're under, specific to your life, your job, the things that you're juggling. I don't want to make give short attention to those burdens. It's really important to recognize what those are and to talk about them, right? To share the burden. Sharing the burden sometimes can feel like I'm burdening somebody else, but actually what happens when we share our burdens is that we connect with other people, and that burden is lightened just because we feel like we're not alone. And like we're able to focus on our resilience by talking to other people, right? People who care about us, who know us, can often remind us how resilient we are. They can share their experiences, we can share ours, and we can often come to new understandings or come up with new suggestions for how to make our lives healthier and more connected in the midst of the things that we're going through. And also talking to others gives us the opportunity to hear about new well-being routines that others do that we haven't considered, right? So many people are sort of surprised when I tell them, it's okay to give yourself permission to worry. Like, schedule time and get it out of your head. Like that can be cathartic to do that, and a lot of people don't do that. So it might not be it might not be intuitive in terms of what would work for you. So all to say, share your burdens, talk about it. And that's the end of a very brief conversation about sleep hygiene and improving your sleep. I have a lot more to say, but I know there are a couple questions. Apparently I can't see them while I'm sharing my screen.
That's all right. I can relay them. So first of all, Sean, thank you so much. You have given us some excellent tips. Since sleeping is something I, like many people, have been struggling with the pandemic, I've researched some of this, but I also learned so much from what you can share. So a few of the questions actually are, will we get a link to the recording of the webinar? Yes, and I agree this is something that people probably will want to watch again. You'll get a link to the recording as well as the slides. And so if you've signed up, they'll be automatic. If you haven't signed up, but you want to share this with a friend afterwards, it will also be on the Mass LOMAP website. We also had a person who wrote in saying that they admired the mistakes slide. That was a good bit of humor.
That was intentional.
We also have a person that said they often wake up at 2 or 3 a.m., cannot fall back asleep. Should I get out of bed and start my workday at that hour? You talked some about if you can't fall back asleep, but what do you think in this scenario?
So I would say it really depends on your experience of being awake at 2 or 3 a.m. and not being able to fall asleep. I would try other things first, right? So if you're wide awake at 2 or 3 a.m., I would first try things like a meditation, a relaxation technique. Some deep breathing sometimes can be helpful. If the reason you're awake is that you have a lot on your mind, like my to-do list, I'm like ready to go get working, or I'm anxious about work, try writing those things out just to get it out of your head and try going back to sleep. Because on the one hand, like you don't want to be wasting your time awake in bed, but if you have the option to fall back asleep, that's going to be better than starting your workday at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. So I would encourage you to do those things first, and then if you're just awake still, I would then encourage the option of getting out of bed but doing something relaxing as opposed to starting your work, because that's obviously going to activate you and make it impossible to go back to sleep. So I would try all the things first to help you get back to sleep before giving up on that plan to then start your work day at 3 a.m. And it's going to be sort of trial and error. It's going to take some repetitive attempts to get to a technique that's going to be most effective. So it might take multiple nights of trying these things before you start seeing a noticeable difference.
That is great advice. I just want to note too, when you were talking about meditation and mindfulness, do you want to share some about Tracy's offerings, your colleague, on the yoga sessions and the mindfulness that she does for LCL?
Yeah, so we've been, with the addition of our colleague, Tracy Myers, Dr. Tracy Myers, we've been offering more mindfulness, meditation, and yoga seminars, as well as ongoing classes. So I would highly recommend checking that out. If you're not familiar with mindfulness, with yoga, with meditation, it can be challenging to all of a sudden implement that when you're anxious and trying to get to sleep. So I would highly recommend getting comfortable with it, getting exposed to those techniques ahead of time and practicing it. It is a practice. So you need to sort of engage in it multiple times before it feels like, oh, this is an effective technique for me. And when you're practicing it, when you're not anxious, you're able to use it better when you are anxious or when you're unable to fall asleep, as opposed to waiting until you're unable to fall asleep and then trying it. So the more that it feels second nature, it feels comfortable to you, you'll be able to benefit from it. So I highly recommend checking out Dr. Myers' yoga and meditation offerings, as well as just other mindfulness techniques that you can do on your own. Sorry, I'm just looking quickly at the questions, but feel free to ask some, or if you've identified ones that.
Sure. We have a person who noted they're wondering if we'll be providing a longer seminar on this subject. So this is part of the webinar for Busy Lawyers series, which generally presentations are under half an hour, and then we have question and answer that can go up to an hour. So with the format of this, it's a shorter presentation. We're so grateful that we had Dr. Sean Healy with us today. We can certainly consider providing a longer seminar on it. I'm not sure whether it will be on this exact subject. Usually our presentations tend to vary on what we go forward. But Sean, if you have more thoughts on that, please share. Cool.
Yeah, I've done numerous presentations, longer presentations on this very subject. If it's helpful, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk about ways I can present to you or your firm or a group of lawyers, or just go into more detail, as well as doing individual conversations about, personal techniques that might be helpful for your situation. I know that there are a number of questions about herbal remedies and sleep medications, and so that's going to depend on you and your situation. Really quickly, in terms of like a sleep medication, oftentimes those can be helpful when you're getting really poor sleep or a pattern of poor sleep, where the consequence of that poor sleep is significant. Obviously, my perspective is the healthiest thing is to have a routine where you're getting quality sleep without sleep medication, where you're not relying on sleep medication to give you that sleep. But sometimes there are times when you're suffering the side effects of sleep deprivation or poor sleep, and a sleep medication is helpful in the short term for sure.
That's excellent. We haven't had a large number of great questions still coming in. Another one I think will be very helpful. This person wants to know about tips for enforcing boundaries with yourself. They said, even when I enforce work boundaries to give myself time to fall asleep, I'm not always great at enforcing the boundary on wind down time, end up going to bed late anyway. I know you talked about some of these things, like setting aside a time to worry, going to night mode on your phones and on your tablets. You can even have a bedtime set on those, so that way your screen will wind down itself. What other tips do you have for enforcing boundaries?
Sure. So in terms of a boundary for work, like I want to stop working at a certain time. Like setting an alarm. Obviously, if you're by yourself, you're sort of relying on yourself to enforce the boundary. That can be difficult, particularly if you don't want to stop working, or if it feels like, I set a boundary, but I'm not good at adhering to it. So depends on what will work for you. Sometimes letting somebody else know that that's your boundary, you're planning on maintaining that boundary, as a way of having accountability, but also, asking somebody to check in with you. Right? Like, oh, how are you doing with shutting things off, or are you able to transition now? So there's lots of things that you can do in terms of timers. You can employ the help of others. You can also use your calendar to schedule a commute. So often, for many of us, we're working remotely, so we don't have that transition activity from work to home. And sometimes many of us have noticed how important those transition activities have been to sort of shifting our mindset, going from work mode to non-work mode. Many people have sort of given themselves an artificial commute to start their day and to end their day, so that transition. Other things I've recommended are, like, at the end of your workday, whatever that time you set for yourself, change what you're wearing, right? Even if it's like, well, I'm not in a suit and tie working remotely anyway, doesn't matter. Even if you're in your sweatpants, change to a different pair of sweatpants, change to something else to mark the fact that I'm transitioning from one time period to another in my day. I'm sort of marking it in some tangible way, so that I feel like now that since I've done this activity, it can help my mind make a transition to my non-work time. And then in terms of like going to bed, if you're the only one there and you want to go to bed at 11 o'clock, but you're again staying up later than you want to, there's ways of setting timers. You could employ the help of others, I guess. You could reach out to friends who might be doing the same thing. I know friends of mine who rely on their spouse or their partner to be like, hey, it's time to go to bed, right? And that works for them, and they rely on that prompt or that accountability. It really depends on what's going to be practically feasible and personally significant to you.
Those are some fantastic tips for transitions and boundaries. I'll add just a few more that I've heard of in that vein. I know that some people will have sort of accountability buddies that if they know they need to get to sleep, they'll write good night to one of their friends. And then the person maybe will do a like back or something, reinforcing, yes, this is a great idea to go to sleep. As far as the commutes, I've heard a great number of attorneys, as you've talked about scheduling the time for commutes, use that time to take a walk or whatever it may be, exercise, meditation. And that way it helps with the transition process as well. One of the other
Yeah, those are great ideas. Go ahead.
Is about talking both with the numbers that's healthy for an adult, and I believe you mentioned on the chart it was 7 to 9, but they also mentioned what about the quality of sleep? What if you're hitting close to the numbers but you're not hitting quality of sleep?
So that's a good place to start. Like, I'm getting close to the numbers, but my quality is down. Then I would start to look into those factors that disrupt the quality of your sleep. Some of those things you can do something about, like if it's a medical issue, getting that addressed, seeing a sleep neurologist, right? Getting assessed for sleep apnea. That's a common issue that disrupts the quality of your sleep. If it's you have a small cute being in your household who wakes you up, you have limited control over asking that small being to sleep through the night. So it's important to recognize, what do you have control over? What options do you have at your disposal versus the ones that you don't? And then trying to utilize some techniques around those things.
Great points. We have people that are asking, do you recommend melatonin? Do you recommend different sorts of, in addition to the white noise, pink noise, brown noise? Not sure if you have thoughts on some of these to help with sleep disruptions.
Yeah. So for melatonin, I was actually just talking with somebody today about how beneficial that was as an additive to his diet. it's not an immediate fix, but using melatonin can sometimes be very helpful in improving your sleep cycle. It's really about what is going to be most significant or meaningful to you or effective for you. So, like I said, some of us aren't as affected by caffeine, whereas others are really sensitive, and that those can change over time. So what's important is to think about what's effective for me at this time in my life for what I'm going through. So all these recommendations are great. They're genius, but really it's about like what's going to work for you today for what you're going through. In terms of like pink noise or brown noise, again, it's the same thing. Some people sleep best with total silence. Other people sleep best with that white noise, that ambient background noise to drown out or dull, sharper noises outside. Some people have the habit of falling asleep to the TV, something more active. And it really, I think it depends on evaluating your sleep quality and how it's affecting you. So for example, I mentioned at one presentation, the importance of saving your bed for sleep. And somebody said, well, my routine is I read in bed. That's how I relax. Should I stop doing that? And my response was, well, are you having trouble falling asleep? They're like, no. I'm like, well, then don't stop that. So just because it might be helpful for one person to only sleep in their bed, for somebody else, they do something else relaxing in bed, like reading or deep breathing or meditating in bed, so that they already have a relaxation technique to induce sleep. So again, like evaluate what is helpful for you, what's working for you, what's not working for you, and be flexible in trying something to improve your sleep, but also maintain what's working for you. So if you sleep well with lots of city noise outside, like there's apps for that. You can like play city noise, you can play jungle noise, you can play all sorts of things, and what's relaxing to you might be different than what's relaxing to somebody else.
Those are such good points that, as with all of these patterns and setting up your sleep hygiene, it also will depend very much on the individual. Those wonderful points. We have another person that says, what are your thoughts about thinking what you were grateful for going to bed? For example, maybe this ties in with your Lashana of writing down some things to think about for later. Maybe this could connect in with they're asking 3 items to think about or write down that they're grateful for the day.
Yeah, that's an excellent practice. Like I said, there are so many helpful techniques that like I wouldn't have time in a day to sort of discuss. That's one of my favorites. So like either having a gratitude journal or just a practice of like reviewing your day. My wife had she used to call them, I'm not sure if this was her term or not, but your banana split and your banana peel, right? So asking our kids like, in your day, like what was your banana peel? What was the bad things in your day? What are the things that were good? What were you grateful for? Sort of review your day and acknowledge the things that were hard, not ignore them, not gloss over them, but acknowledge them. And in at the same time, acknowledging that there are things that were good, that you're grateful for, that were positive, so that your day doesn't feel all good or all bad. Because oftentimes if we're unable to recognize what we're grateful for or the positives, then it's easy for a negative event in our day to sort of overshadow how we assess our day. And it's like, oh, this day was terrible because this thing happened. And when we're more mindful about what else happened, what are we grateful for, we can do both. We don't have to sugarcoat it. We can say, this was hard and this was good, or this is what I'm grateful for. And oftentimes that can, influence how we're feeling. It'll influence our anxiety, our angst, our ability to relax. And so I'm all for that. That's a great idea.
That is a wonderful idea. And I like the banana split, banana peel. I've heard somewhat similar with roses and thorns. We did that in a place I used to work.
Mm-hmm.
It was very helpful. All right, someone asked, what specifically can you recommend to assist with anxiety and improving mindset? I know you've touched on a lot of things for these. Do you have other ones specifically to connect with anxiety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are lots of things that are helpful with addressing anxiety. One is to just be aware of the source of the anxiety. So if you're anxious about your work versus if you're anxious about, your safety, the pandemic, family members, your ability to do what's, on your long list of to-dos. So recognizing what it is that's causing your anxiety, and also implementing some things to address it before bedtime, right? So again, the more that we can feel prepared for sleep, the better. And anxiety is one of those things that disrupts our sleep so much. And we often are sort of surprised by it because we're so busy. We're not addressing it during the day. We're sort of keeping it at bay, and then it comes in when we're trying to sleep. So being more proactive in addressing it, so recognizing what the sources are, addressing it in the moment when it comes up, when we're starting to feel anxious in the moment or during our day. And again, it's going to depend on what type of anxiety, what the source of that anxiety is. That's going to sort of direct the best thing to do about that anxiety. And also your awareness of what's most effective for your anxiety. So for some people, like exercise is really helpful to work through their anxiety. For others, journaling is really helpful to write it out, right? Sometimes when we have an anxious thought, our sense of it is like it's so big because it feels so intense. But then when we write it down, we're like, oh, like my actual anxious thought is finite. It wasn't as big or overwhelming as I thought. Now that I can see it, I feel like I can do something about it. So sometimes just getting it out of your head, writing it, seeing it can be helpful. There's lots of anxiety coping skills around mindset, sort of reminding yourself that you are resilient, that the thing that you are anxious about most likely is not unique, right? So you've been through things before. You've managed similar situations, or you've been worried about similar things before, or other people have managed these things before. So finding support and comfort in either your previous experience, being resilient and working through it, or through other people's experiences can be really helpful as well. And again, I mentioned talking about it, right? So just getting it out. So you don't feel like you're, handling the burden all by yourself, and you don't feel like it's all up to you to sort it out. Just sharing it with others can be extremely helpful. And again, there's lots of other things that I could go into, but I don't want to keep you here for 4 hours.
Those are fantastic tips. And I think a lot of what you just addressed also ties into what this other question was of what if something isn't working for them? And I think that ties into how you said about identifying, addressing the issues, trying things, finding out what's working for you, whether it's journaling, exercise, etc. We also have another question. Oh, I've heard this theory a lot. Is it possible to catch up on sleep, or is it more important to get a consistent amount each night? If they get a few hours a night during the week and then sleep more on the weekend, is that healthy? What are your thoughts?
So it's much better to get consistent sleep, every night of the week. The idea of catching up, we don't really catch up, right? So it's not a direct relationship between, like I need to deposit 8 hours of sleep each night. And then if I don't, I can make a larger deposit later. It's not like a bank account in that way. We really do need that consistent sleep because the effects of poor sleep are current, right? So if you get a poor night's sleep, you're affected immediately. So even if you get a better night's sleep on the weekend or you try to catch up, you might benefit from additional sleep, but you're not really making up for that deficit, both physically, emotionally, and in the time that you spent doing your work and interacting with people. So that idea that you can catch up really isn't accurate. It's not really helpful. So really prioritizing quality sleep and enough sleep each night of the week. And if you really want to be good about it, or sort of like the gold standard, you'll have the same bedtime every night of the week, even on the weekends. You'll wake up the same time every morning, even on the weekends. so that you have that consistency.
Those are great ideas too. So let's see, we're getting towards the hour. I want to let you know, Sean, this has been tremendously helpful. I also want to remind people that if you have more thoughts about this or other questions, to encourage you to look at the resources on the LOMAP and LCLMA websites. In particular, you can look at the events calendars, see what presentations, what sessions, what support groups are coming up. If you're interested in scheduling a free consultation with someone, definitely encourage you to reach out to. As I said, I'm so lucky to have Sean as a colleague. He and my other colleagues have such tremendous expertise. I definitely recommend that you find out more about our organization and the services we can provide. I want to take a note just if we have more questions coming in to let you know that we will have our next webinar for busy lawyers on April 7th at 12 p.m. It will be with Dorna Morney, and this topic will be legal commoditization, how to build your own legal product to compete with LegalZoom. And I have heard Dorna talk before, and she is excellent. Sean, I wondered, since you've addressed so many great questions, if you have other thoughts to leave us with. You've shared everything from sleep hygiene, recognizing how it's the impacts of sleep on our system, how we can try to schedule things to get into better hygiene habits. Do you have some closing thoughts about sleep? I know this is such an important topic, and you were mentioning too, and how important this is for busy professionals.
Yeah, my closing thought is just my recommendation is to see it as both very important and a work in progress. Oftentimes when we feel like, I want to improve my sleep, I might try something and not feel like it's beneficial and then feel hopeless, like I can't improve my sleep in some way, or there's too many barriers. But if you see it as like similar to, law school, where when you started, you didn't know what you're doing and you learned as you went, right? And even in your practice, you often feel like, I don't know what I'm doing, and then I learn as I go. See improving your sleep the same way. Like, I want to improve my sleep. There are things that I can try, but I need to try them consistently and over time, and make adjustments as I go. And just to sort of, have some grace for yourself, cut yourself some slack, and allow yourself to try some different things over time, and just pay attention to what works. And then if it's not working and you've given it a good try something else. And if it's helpful to talk to somebody, I'm here, Laura's here, reach out to us.
Those are wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much. This is terrific. We have a number of people have written in the chat as well. Thank you so much for the insights. Great webinar. We had more people ask, will the recording be available? Yes, this recording, once it's been processed, will be sent to all registered attendees. So don't worry, you can definitely watch this again, because I know that Sham imparted so much great information that probably to watch it a few times or even to listen to it. I know that I've gotten it released recently into podcasts. This would be great to have the recording if you're doing dishes or something, hit play and let some of these great suggestions really soak in as you work on these practices. So, and we have more thank yous. Yes, thank you so much, Sean. This has been terrific to have you with us. I want to thank to all of the attendees today. We are delighted to have you here. Thank you for spending time with us. And this is such an important presentation, and we are delighted to have learned so many good tips on why sleep is so important and how we can improve it. So thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Laura. My pleasure.
I will stop the recording.